All right, y'all, welcome to the show. So I'm all over the place today. I have Gaza updates. Do we have another pause coming in the fighting? Potentially. The details are honestly not great, but there's the potential for another pause in the fighting. I also have, of course, huge Trump news coming out of Colorado. You're not going to want to miss that segment. We're going to get to that for the second story. Then we have the Pope, man. He is not laying off of Israel. He is going in against the IDF. The U.S. State Department responds to what the Pope said. Really interesting stuff. And then later on, we'll get to, there was a massive hit job on Dean Phillips. So basically, if you dissent from the Democratic establishment, even if you are the quote-unquote centrist, moderate corporatist, they still are coming for you. So we'll talk about all that and much more. Everybody do me a big favor. Please click that subscribe button. It helps out massively in the algorithm. It doesn't cost you anything at all. We want to keep growing the community. Appreciate it deeply. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into it here. So we have some big news coming out of the UN. Apparently, there's been some negotiations going on there to do another pause in the fighting. So here's what they say in Huffington Post. The U.S. is about to make a decision at the UN that could change Gaza's fate. Apparently, if the U.S. Oh, wait. Here's the part. The UN Security Council will vote Tuesday on a resolution proposed by the United Arab Emirates, a close U.S. partner, on behalf of Arab and Muslim states that calls for limiting the fighting and dramatically increasing humanitarian aid for Gazans, two diplomats told HuffPost on Monday. It's a major moment for besieged Palestinians and their supporters, and for the Biden administration, which is struggling, this is incredible, this sentence, which is struggling to balance its support for Israel with international criticism of the devastating offensive and deep concerns among American officials about the consequences of largely unchecked support for Israel. Let me just say, they're not balancing Dickie McGee's acts. Israel has a total green light behind the scenes. We know because their actions prove it, and the U.S. comes out every 3 days and wags their finger and goes, "Can you please bomb more nicely? We would appreciate it." And Israel goes, "No." And they go, "Okay." Like, that's what's going on right now. If the U.S. votes to pass the resolution, that would be the strongest signal yet from the Biden administration that Israel must change its conduct to protect civilians. Historically, including under President Joe Biden, the U.S. has almost always used its influence at the UN to shield Israel from pressure. Alternatively, the U.S. could abstain, declining to use its veto power and allowing the resolution to pass in what would represent a major warning to Israel, or the U.S. could veto the resolution as it did a UN resolution calling for a Gaza ceasefire on December 8th, making America an outlier on the Security Council among the nearly 200 members of the UN, 153 of whom endorsed a ceasefire on December 12th in a vote in the General Assembly. So they go on to explain here that basically the US and Israel are fighting over every single word in this resolution. So they don't want to cease hostilities. They want the language to be, we want to suspend hostilities. In other words, they want to leave the door open for like a temporary, deal in the meantime, while allowing Israel after a deal to, again, go back to obliterating Gaza completely. So effectively, what's happening here is the UN is agreeing to play ball, and they're saying, hey, we'll soften our language so that, it's not as wide-reaching a ceasefire or a pause here. And I think what the UN recognizes is that's all we're going to get out of the US and Israel is like to slow down the pace of the slaughter, not stop the slaughter. So effectively they're giving in and they're like, fine, like what language do you need in order to get this thing passed? Now, again, it should be noted that the UN General Assembly, which is like all of the countries, they've been crystal clear all along. The votes are overwhelming. It's like over 90%, over 95% of the countries in the world are like, stop killing innocent civilians. But the U.S. vetoes it every time they try to get something done, and they virtue signal on the side of Israel. Now, the Security Council is where the real decisions get made. It's a much smaller group, and on that front, the U.S. has largely been shielding Israel there as well. So this is an attempt to get something through the Security Council that would maybe slow down the pace of the obliteration of Gaza. Now, having said that, this vote and the language that they're arguing over, it's been pushed back more and more and more. And it looks like the reason for that, we now learned, is this. This is reporting from Axios. Israel offers Hamas 1 week pause in fighting as part of a new hostage deal. Israel is offering to pause the fighting in Gaza for at least 1 week as part of a new deal to get Hamas to release more than 36 hostages the terror group is holding, 2 Israeli officials and and another source with knowledge of the situation told Axios. The proposal made through Qatari mediators is the first Israel has offered since the collapse of a deal last month that led to a 7-day ceasefire and the release of more than 100 hostages. Israeli officials say the proposal shows Israel is determined to relaunch serious negotiations for the release of more hostages, even as Hamas said it will not resume negotiations as long as the fighting continues. About 130 Israeli and foreign nationals are still being held hostage in Gaza. White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said Tuesday that includes 8 Americans. So my reading on this is the only reason Israel is even open to this, which again would be temporary, they go right back to bombing Gaza into the Stone Age afterwards, is because there is tremendous domestic pressure. Like, the family members of the hostages are like, what are you doing? Get them out of there. Make a deal. Like, stop with this, I'm just going to bomb everything in sight and ask questions later. Save the lives of my loved ones. And so, and of course, the other day we learned that the Israeli government killed 3 of their own hostages. They were shirtless to show that they didn't have any weapons on them. They were waving a white flag. They were speaking Hebrew. Didn't matter. They got murked. And so this is leading to more domestic pressure vis-a-vis the hostages. They go on here and say, CIA Director Bill Burns met Monday with Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani and David Barnea, the head of Israel's Mossad spy agency, in Warsaw to discuss a potential deal to secure the release of more hostages. Now, look, the bottom line is this, though. The bottom line is this. Even under a best-case scenario, it's the same thing that we saw before, which is, okay, we'll pause for a week, maybe a little more than a week, but then we're going to go right back to trying to wipe Gaza off the map. So, from my perspective, this all appears nowhere near good enough, not remotely good enough. And look, if you are in Hamas, you're going to look at this and think the same thing, because you're thinking, what, we're just staving off the inevitable of Gaza being wiped off the map? So you're going to need more than that. And by the way, the last time we had a deal, when we went through the preliminary provisions of the deal, I told you guys, it doesn't look like there's enough there for Hamas to agree to it. And then lo and behold, a couple days later, we had all the terms of the deal, and it turns out Hamas did get more. They ended up getting more Palestinian political prisoners released in exchange for the hostages and a pause in the fighting and more humanitarian aid, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like it's a similar situation here where, like, you need to sweeten the pot more, because just pausing the inevitable absolute destruction and obliteration of Gaza is not a deal to write home about. Okay, so now I'll give you guys an update. We have new numbers. This is from the human rights group Euromed Monitor. According to them, there are 26,612 Palestinians who have now been killed. By the way, I should point out that I'm sure many of the deaths now are as a direct result of going thirsty or going hungry, like starving to death. Because this medieval-style siege, it's using starvation as a weapon of war, and the logical consequence of that is there's going to be people who die from it. So I've never seen anything like this in my life. This is a level of barbarity that I think we all hoped had been left far in the past. It turns out that's not the case. So now we're at 10,305 children who have been killed. By the way, Chris Hayes, the MSNBC host, finally came out and said, Jesus Christ, all right, we got to stop this. This is too far. I mean, October 7th was horrific, but this is not the way you react to October 7th. You don't respond to an atrocity with your own atrocities. And, better late than never, good, but also it literally took over 10,000 children being killed before Chris Hayes, an MSNBC host, finally said, all right, enough. We have 5,475 women who have been killed. Of the 26,612 Palestinians killed in total, 24,320 of them are civilians. So you do the percentage on that. It ain't pretty. We have about 52,000 injuries. Now 93 journalists have been killed, and 1.9 million Gazans are displaced. Remember, there's 2.3 million people in Gaza. So that you do that percentage as well. It's ugly, man. And then also I should point out 296 schools have been damaged, and 162 mosques and 4 churches. So the number that we also always show here is 131 targeted health facilities, 23 hospitals bombed. I always bring that one up for the simple reason that people were arguing over the Al Ali hospital bombing and saying, well, was it a misfired Hamas rocket or Palestinian jihad thing, or was it the IDF? And it's like, even if I grant you that wasn't the IDF, which by the way I don't, I think it was the IDF, what about the 22 other hospitals that have been bombed? It just goes to show you how disingenuous the entire debate around this thing has been. All right. So now let me play this for you. So in the midst of all of this slaughter, the numbers I just showed you, Here's what the Secretary of Defense comes out and says in a press conference.
As John F. Kennedy said in 1960, America's friendship with Israel is a national commitment. That was true then, and it's even truer now. The United States will remain Israel's closest friend in the world. As I've said repeatedly, our support for Israel's security remains unshakable, and it always will.
So let's just digest what they're actually saying here. What they're saying is, yeah, we may virtue signal around the edges and say, oh, you need to be more specific in targeting Hamas and not civilians. But fundamentally, it doesn't matter. Because we are going to back you as a matter of principle. It is an unshakable, his words, not mine, bond. All right, well then when everybody says, you are just as guilty of the war crimes being committed, that is accurate. That is true. This is a very clear message. And it's astonishing. So I think we discussed this the other day, but I'll bring it up here again. Ryan Grimm says, extremely ominous. The reference here from Israel's representative at the UN to a willingness of other countries to accept Gaza workers suggests a rather dystopian potential that after Gaza is made uninhabitable, the surviving Palestinians will be allowed to become itinerant migrant laborers around the world. So this is part of their plan. This is like the voluntary relocation thing. And Palestinians will be in a position sort of like the refugees are now, where like they're not citizens anywhere, they don't have any rights, and they're just stuck in this like legal limbo, and they're being taken advantage of for cheap labor. This is like what they're telling you is the plan moving forward. So I found this actually rather interesting. I didn't think this would be the case. So we had a poll that came out the other day that said only 2% or it's like 1.6% to be exact, of the Israeli population was like, you know what, you're using too much force in Gaza. That is astonishing. That's astonishing. So when I saw this poll, I was like, that's interesting. Apparently, most Israelis oppose annexing Gaza after the conflict. A recent survey conducted by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem reveals that a majority of Israelis are opposed to the annexation of the Gaza Strip when the ongoing conflict with Hamas ends. According to the findings, 56% of Israelis are against the annexation and resettlement of Gaza, while 33% express support and 11% remain undecided. Regarding the post-conflict control of Gaza, the survey reflects diverse perspectives. Notably, 23% advocate for Arab countries to supervise Gaza, and 22% support Israeli military governance. Additionally, 18% favor an international force under the UN, and another 18% lean towards the idea of Israel annexing Gaza. So the reason why I'm surprised by this is that based on the numbers about supporting the aggression, supporting the bombing campaign, I thought it would definitely be a majority of Israelis that say, yeah, resettle Gaza. But it's not. They're against resettling it. But I got bad news for these Israelis. That is literally what they're in the process of doing right now. That's why you have in the middle of Gaza City a giant Israeli flag. That's why there were videos coming out from IDF soldiers in tanks recording it as they're in North Gaza. It's all rubble, and they're planting Israeli flags like every 30 feet. You have people already talking about, we're going to get a house on the beach here. You have companies that are like releasing ads about, yeah, we're going to start building like townhouses on the beach in Gaza. So I think that is what's almost certainly going to happen. But apparently most of the population is actually against it, which is a good thing. But, are they going to change anything here? I tend to doubt it. And also, it's not like, even if Netanyahu gets kicked out of office, and you got one of the opposition party leaders in there like Yair Lapid, he's just as insane as Netanyahu is, and he probably keep the same policy going. All right, so this was wild. So an Israeli representative goes on this British radio show, and I mean, Ryan Grimm makes a good point. He says, this is the level of argument that we're being subjected to. Listen to the claim of the Israeli representative here about what's happening on the ground in Gaza. This is astonishing.
If a ceasefire means the return of the hostages and the dismantlement of a genocidal regime that has stated that they're going to attack us again, then everybody would be in favor of a ceasefire. But if a ceasefire means that we're just going to keep them quiet for a bit until they attack again, then it's Israel's obligation to defend its citizens and destroy that threat, don't you think?
Why is it necessary, it is reported, to start shooting, having snipers outside a church? I
saw the reports this morning. The church, there are no churches in Gaza, so I'm not quite sure where the report is talking about.
There's a Catholic church in there, isn't there? That is.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are no Christians because they were driven out by Hamas.
Respectfully, there are Christians because I spoke to an MP yesterday who has family members in the church who are Christians.
Well, I don't know what happened. I don't know who was attacked. I didn't see the report.
She just says, oh, there's no churches in Gaza. That is absolutely untrue. In fact, he brought up a British MP who has, connections to people who are Christians in Gaza and go to a church there. There was a U.S. representative, Justin Amash, or former U.S. representative, Justin Amash. He has family members who were injured and killed in an IDF bombing of a church in Gaza. And this is going back to maybe, 3 weeks into the conflict or something like that. There are multiple churches in Gaza. Yes, the Christian population is a minority, but they exist. And she just comes out and says, no, there are no Christians in Gaza. There are no churches in Gaza. What? And look, what Ryan Grimm is saying is exactly right. That I'm repeatedly stunned. My jaw is on the floor over some of the counter arguments I'm hearing from the pro-Israeli people. They just say the most insane things and espouse it completely confidently. I've never seen anybody gaslight this bad. Honestly, even the Republicans and the conservatives during the war in Iraq, yeah, they would gaslight the shit out of us on the left being anti-war. But it wasn't this stupid. It wasn't this dumb. This is record-breaking dumb. All right, so now we have this from Rami Abdul. He's, of course, the chairman of Euromed, monitor of the human rights group. Horrifying accounts emerged from Palestinian civilians in Gaza, falsely portrayed by Israel as Hamas members. A medic recounts being detained for 40 days, subjected to severe torture. Quote, they drew an ambulance on the opposite wall and told me to go and bring Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas. So there's been many examples of this lately where, the IDF will strip down a bunch of Palestinian men to their underwear and humiliate them and embarrass them and make them surrender guns that weren't even theirs. And we know because there's documented evidence of this person's actually a doctor, this person's a businessman, this person works for the UN. And so they're doing this. And again, I don't know how they can delude themselves into thinking they're getting away with this or they're winning the PR war. It's obvious what the entire world is going to think watching this. Now, I know they have the backing of the U.S., so they can effectively get away with whatever the hell they want to get away with. But that doesn't mean that, you're going to convince people of obviously untrue things. So here we have another. Again, the claims here are astonishing. So we've been seeing a lot of this guy, the Israeli PM spokesperson. Listen to what he says here.
So I would reject the categorization of the words he used, cold-blooded killing. That would indicate a deliberate targeting of civilians. That's something we don't do. We don't shoot people who are going to church to pray. It just doesn't happen. That's not the way the IDF operates. That's against our rules of engagement. We don't know exactly what happened, and I would urge people not to jump to conclusions. There have been in the past all sorts of stories put out by Hamas and their supporters accusing Israel of all sorts of terrible deeds, and in the end they've proved to be wrong. And we're talking about a combat area. There's exchanges of fire between Israeli forces and the Hamas terrorists. To say that Israel is deliberately targeting Christian worshippers, that's a terrible accusation that is unfounded.
Would you acknowledge, Mr. Regev, that the bullets that killed these women were fired by the IDF?
I do not know that to be true. Obviously, we're looking into it. Could they have been killed by Palestinian terrorists who were shooting at our people indiscriminately? I don't know. But we've got to be very careful. There have been countless stories since this conflict began, where reports out of Gaza, people are 100% sure that Israel did something terrible or this, that, or the other. And in the end, it's been proven conclusively that that was not the case. And people have had to retract their words. Unfortunately, some have refused. But
he's talking about a specific story where I think it was a mother and a child got shot at a church. They're afraid to go to the bathroom. They're afraid to go to the bathroom because they get shot at by snipers when they do it. There was a janitor who was doing something and he got shot. I don't know how they think they can get away with this when there's evidence the size of Mount Everest that shows that, of course, you're targeting civilians. You have a 95% civilian death rate. Are you the worst army in the world? Is it all Mr. Magoo's firing stuff here, or is it deliberate? So I got another one just like this here. Ready?
Well, we're now joined from Tel Aviv by Yuri Edelstein. He's the chairman of the Israeli Parliament Foreign Affairs and Security Committee. Thank you very much for coming on the program. You heard our member of parliament, Leila Moran there, her relatives, 6 of them, targeted by Israeli army snipers in a church compound in Gaza. What on earth is going on?
Well, that's the question to Leila, not to me. I think that I can only say that we as the Jewish people are used to blood libels. So to hear that Israeli snipers are targeting women on purpose and not letting them leave the church is something that reminds me usually the atmosphere in the Middle Ages before another holiday.
Are you saying it's a lie? Are you saying it didn't happen?
This is a flat lie, absolutely. No Israeli sniper ever purposely targeted any civilian, to say nothing about women.
Well,
so the first reaction is, oh, she's just doing blood libel. That's anti-Semitic. It's a specific story about 6 family members being shot at when they're at a church. Again, are all of the news agencies making this up? Like, it's specific detail about a specific instance where Christians are being shot at by IDF snipers when they're in a church. And he's like, well, that's blood libel. So in other words, he's saying that's an old anti-Semitic trope. So you're anti-Semitic for being against the IDF shooting at your civilian family members when they're bunkering in a church. And then he said at the end, we never target civilians. You never target civilians? Just a few examples here. Democracy Now! UN finds Israel intentionally shot children, journalists, and the disabled during Gaza protests. This was in March 2019. That's during the Great March of Return, which was like a civil rights-inspired nonviolent resistance movement from the people of Gaza, and many of them got maimed and killed. Here we have Israeli forces deliberately killed Palestinian paramedic. 42 knees in one day. Israeli snipers open up about shooting Gaza protesters. That they would purposely shoot out the knees of these protesters during the Great March of Return. And you got all these people who are amputees now in Gaza. And this is one of Israel's top newspapers with this story. Purposefully targeting civilians. A Palestinian protester was shot by an Israeli sniper. One celebrating soldier called it a legendary clip. So, again, and we would never target civilians. Do I really have to do this? Do I really have to go back to these numbers? 24,320 civilians, including over 10,000 children. Again, if you can be convinced by these absolute ghouls that they're not doing this on purpose, I think you can be convinced of literally anything. I think you might be 47 years old and still believe in Santa Claus, if you believe what the IDF is saying there. All right, so now, I told you guys about this clip the other day, but I wanted to show you it. Now, it is in Hebrew, but this went mega viral for obvious reasons. So this is Israeli journalist Shimon Riklin, and he says, quote, I am for war crimes. I don't care if I'm criticized. I am unable to sleep without watching homes in Gaza being destroyed. More houses, more buildings. I don't want them to have anything to go back to. And this, remember, this is on top of, you can say, hey, this is just a journalist. Right? It's not like an Israeli government official. But then you go to the quotes of the Israeli government officials, and it's like, we are now doing the Gaza Nakba. There are no such thing as innocent Palestinians. These are human animals. These are Amalek, a biblical story where like you're supposed to kill even the kids and stuff and the women. And the list goes on and on of the genocidal rhetoric. There was multiple Israeli politicians that floated nuking Gaza. Probably the only reason they're not doing it is because they know that the nuclear fallout would impact them too in Israel proper. You can't really nuke somebody who's like right next to you or right on top of you type stuff, you know? But anyway, I'll play this for you. Again, it's in Hebrew.
אני מודה, אני אגיד את זה פה, לא אכפת לי שירדו עליי, אוספים פה חומרים. אני לא נרדם טוב בלי שאני רואה בתים קורסים בעזה. מה אני אעשה? עוד בתים, עוד מגדלים, שלא יהיה להם לאן לחזור. אגב, בתקופת התנ"ך גם היו זורים את האדמה במלח. הם צריכים לזכור עם עמלק. הם צריכים לזכור את זה להרבה מאוד זמן. אי אפשר להגיע לאיזה הסדר מיד. סליחה, זה רק אני. זה פשע מלחמה.
And remember, there was an Israeli official the other day that we covered that said we need to turn Gaza into Auschwitz. So you have, people like us criticizing what Israel's doing and saying, oh my God, this looks like Nazi-like. And then, people get like shocked and offended at that and they say it's anti-Semitic. And then Israeli officials come out and be like, yeah, we should make Gaza look like Auschwitz. It's like, well, this is why we're saying what we're saying about how these are horrific atrocities. All right. Then we have this. Pentagon announces new international mission to counter attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea. So this would include the United Kingdom, Bahrain, Canada, France, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, and some other countries as well. And this is their attempt to be like, okay, Yemen, we know that you're messing up global trade by seizing these ships. And now other ships have to be rerouted, and the insurance rates on these ships are going through the roof, and Israel's going to not be able to get a lot of goods that they were getting previously. So they know it's a problem, and so now the U.S. is doing this. We have the coalition of the willing here. That's what they called it when we got countries to sign up to do the war in Iraq with us. We have a coalition of the willing, and they're saying we're going to all, tackle this problem together to stop Yemen from doing this piracy. But then remember, guys, what did I tell you? I told you when we shot down 15 of their drones, I was like, okay, well, what happens next now? What happens next? Do they start more directly targeting our ships? Do we then retaliate to that? Do we go a step further and say, well, why not bomb Sana'a in Yemen, like Houthi-controlled Yemen? And then look at this. U.S. considering airstrikes against Houthi forces in Yemen to stop attacks in the Red Sea. Reported by Bloomberg. Right on time. Exactly what I told you. So now we need to get into a war with Yemen because Israel won't stop genociding Palestinians in Gaza. Because Yemen has made very clear the only reason we're doing this is because of what Israel is doing in Gaza. If Israel stops doing this, we will stop seizing the ships. And instead of just having Israel stop doing a genocide, which you should do as a matter of principle, not just because of what Yemen is doing, right? But instead of doing that, we're knocking out Yemeni drones, and we're saying maybe we'll bomb Sana'a and where Houthi forces are inside Yemen. I didn't sign up for this. Did you sign up for this? There wasn't even a vote on this in Congress. By the way, if you do have that vote, I'm sure it probably would pass. Because the one thing everybody seems to agree on is more war, yes. But this is unacceptable, man. This is unacceptable. But look, we'll keep our eye on what's coming. Hopefully there's some sort of a pause. But, I mean, I'd be lying to you if I didn't say, even best case scenario, they just go back to wiping Gaza off the map in a week. And that I'm not okay with, and you shouldn't be okay with, and nobody should be okay with. This needs to come to a complete close now, and there needs to be a just and lasting settlement towards peace, so Palestinians get human rights, and we don't find ourselves back in a position like this, where there is another October 7th, and there is another retaliatory slaughter. We need to find a way out of this cycle of violence, and unfortunately, that's not even on the table right now. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.